The sun was setting on Whispering Creek when Olivia Jenkins spotted the familiar silhouette on horseback cresting the hill. After 30 years, she'd know that posture anywhere, back straight as a fence post, hat tilted just so against the evening light. Luke Ingram had returned, and the sight of him made her weathered hands tremble as they gripped the porch railing. Montana Territory, 1882. The landscape had changed little in the decades since they'd last spoken, though everything else had. The small town had grown, the railroad had come through, and time had etched its passage on their faces. Olivia brushed a strand of silver-streaked hair from her face, tucking it back into her once auburn bun. At 48, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that life on the frontier demanded of women who survived it. Her dress was simple but well kept, her boots worn but polished, habits from a life that had required both practicality and pride. Luke dismounted with the same fluid motion he'd had as a young man, though Olivia noted a slight hesitation, a stiffness in his left leg that hadn't been there before. His face had weathered into deep creases around the eyes, his once dark hair now mostly gray beneath his dust-covered hat. At 52, he looked every bit the cattle rancher he'd become, hardened by sun and wind and lonely prairie nights. "Evening, Liv," he said simply, as if they'd spoken yesterday instead of 3 decades ago. "Luke." She nodded, her voice steady despite the thundering in her chest. "Been a long time." He removed his hat, revealing more of that silver hair and those familiar green eyes that still held the same intensity. "Too long." Neighbors passing by nodded politely, some whispering behind cupped hands. Everyone in Whispering Creek knew the story, or thought they did. How the young schoolteacher and the ambitious cowboy had once been inseparable, how he'd left to make his fortune, how she'd stayed and built a life without him. "What brings you back?" Olivia asked, though she knew. The Ingram family ranch had passed to him after his brother's death last month. Luke looked down at his worn boots before meeting her eyes again. "Daniel's gone. Someone has to look after the place." "I was sorry to hear about Daniel." She meant it. Daniel Ingram had been a good man, unlike his younger brother who'd broken her heart and disappeared without a proper goodbye. "Thank you." Luke shifted his weight, wincing slightly. "I heard about Thomas too. 5 years back, was it?" 6, Olivia corrected. Thomas Jenkins had been a kind husband, a devoted father to their 3 children, and a respected merchant in town. Not the love of her life, but a good partner nonetheless. Influenza took him quick. They fell silent, 30 years of unspoken words hanging between them like the gathering dusk. From inside, Olivia heard her youngest daughter calling, "Mama, who's there?" "An old friend," Olivia called back, not taking her eyes off Luke. He placed his hat back on his head. "I should go, just wanted to pay my respects." "Of course." She nodded, her hands clutching her skirt to keep from reaching for him. Luke turned to leave but paused. "Maybe I'll see you in town sometime." "Maybe," she replied, knowing full well their paths would cross in a community this small. As he rode away, Olivia remained on the porch until his figure disappeared into the gathering darkness. The cool evening air carried the scent of sage and memories of a time when they'd been young and foolish and desperately in love. Inside, her daughter Rebecca looked up from the stove where she was preparing supper. At 22, she was the image of Olivia in her youth except for her eyes. Those were Thomas's. "Who was that, Mama?" Olivia busied herself with the table settings. "Luke Ingram. He's come back to take over his family's ranch." The Luke Ingram. The one Mrs. Patterson always gossips about whenever she has too much elderberry wine at social gatherings. Olivia smiled despite herself. "The very same." Rebecca studied her mother's face. "Are you all right?" "Of course," Olivia replied too quickly. "It was a lifetime ago." But as she prepared the evening meal, her mind wandered to another time, another life before the silence, before the years apart. To when they were young and everything seemed possible, spring, 1852. Whispering Creek was barely more than a trading post when 16-year-old Olivia arrived with her father. James Jensen had brought his daughter west after her mother's death, determined to start fresh in a place unburdened by memories. Olivia had been setting up their modest cabin when a lanky young man appeared with an armful of firewood. "Pa sent me over with these," he'd said, depositing the logs by the door. "Said you might need them. I'm Luke Ingram. We've got the cattle spread to the east." "Olivia Jensen," she'd replied, taking in his sun-browned face and clear green eyes. "Thank you." That first meeting had blossomed into friendship, as Luke showed her the hidden beauty of the territory, the secret waterfall beyond the ridge, the meadow that exploded with wildflowers after spring rains, the best places to find huckleberries in late summer. By the time she was 18 and he 22, friendship had deepened into something more. They would meet at the old oak tree by Miller's Creek, talking for hours about the future, his dreams of building the largest cattle operation in the territory, her hope of opening a proper school for the growing number of children. "We'll do it together, Liv," he'd promised, his young face earnest in the moonlight. "I'll build the herd, you'll teach the children, and we'll grow old watching this place become something special." Then came that fateful autumn day when everything changed. Luke had ridden in from the range, his expression thunderous. "The Blackwell outfit is buying up land all around us," he'd told her, pacing angrily. "They're going to squeeze us out if I don't do something." "What can you do?" she'd asked, concerned by the reckless gleam in his eye. "I'm heading to California," he announced. "The gold rush is still bringing opportunities. I can make enough to buy more land, more cattle, establish ourselves so firmly that no one can push us out." California. The word had fallen from her lips like a stone. For how long? A year? Maybe 2. He'd gripped her shoulders. "Wait for me, Liv. When I come back, we'll build everything we've talked about." She'd waited. 1 year stretched into 2, then 3. His letters, once frequent and full of plans, became sporadic, then stopped altogether. By the time she turned 23, Olivia had accepted what everyone else in Whispering Creek already knew: Luke Ingram wasn't coming back. Life continued. The town grew. At 25, she married Thomas Jenkins, a widower with a young son who needed a mother. They added 2 daughters to their family. Olivia opened her school. She built a good life, not the one she'd dreamed of with Luke, but a fulfilling one nonetheless. And then, without warning, here he was again. 2 days after Luke's appearance on her porch, Olivia encountered him at Mulligan's general store. She was selecting fabric for a new dress for Rebecca when the bell above the door jangled and he walked in. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said formally, tipping his hat as several curious customers looked on. "Mr. Ingram," she replied with equal formality, though her fingers tightened on the bolt of blue calico. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "I was wondering if you might spare me a few minutes of your time, to talk." Olivia glanced around at the interested faces, pretending not to listen. "I don't think that would be appropriate." "Please, Liv," he murmured, and the familiar nickname on his lips after so many years nearly undid her. "There are things I need to say." Mrs. Mulligan emerged from behind the counter, her eyes alight with curiosity. "Everything to your satisfaction, Mrs. Jenkins?" "Yes, thank you," Olivia said, making her decision. "I'll take 3 yards of the blue calico, please." While Mrs. Mulligan measured and cut the fabric, Olivia turned back to Luke. "Sunday after church, I'll be taking my usual walk by the creek." Relief crossed his weathered features. "Thank you." He purchased supplies: coffee, flour, salt, ammunition while Olivia completed her transaction. They left the store separately, but every person inside would be spreading the news of their encounter before sundown. Sunday arrived clear and bright. Olivia sat through Reverend Walsh's sermon without hearing a word, too aware of Luke sitting 3 pews behind her. Her eldest daughter Martha, now 26 and married with a child of her own, noticed her distraction. "Are you feeling well, Mama?" she whispered. "Just thinking," Olivia assured her. After the service, she declined the usual invitation to Sunday dinner at Martha's house, claiming a headache. Instead, she changed from her church clothes into a simpler dress and walked to Miller's Creek, where they had once spent so many hours together. Luke was already there, sitting on the fallen log that had served as their bench all those years ago. He stood when he saw her approach. "You came," he said, as if he'd half expected her not to. "I said I would." Olivia remained standing, maintaining a proper distance. Luke gestured to the log. "Would you like to sit? I'd prefer to walk if you don't mind." She didn't trust herself to sit beside him in this place of so many memories. He nodded, falling into step beside her as they followed the creek's meandering path. For several minutes, they walked in silence. "You look well, Liv," he finally said. "Thank you." She kept her eyes on the path. "How is the ranch? In worse shape than I expected." Luke sighed. Daniel wasn't much for maintenance these last few years. His heart wasn't in it after Mary died. Olivia had attended Mary Ingram's funeral 7 years earlier. Daniel had been devastated by his wife's death. He loved her very much. Yes, he did. Luke's voice softened. They were lucky to have found each other. The implied comparison hung in the air between them. "Why did you want to speak with me, Luke?" Olivia asked directly. "Surely not to discuss your brother's marriage." He stopped walking, and she was forced to stop as well, turning to face him. The sunlight filtering through the cottonwoods dappled his face, highlighting the lines time had etched there. "I wanted to explain," he said, "about why I never came back, why I stopped writing." Olivia's heart thumped painfully against her ribs. "It's been 30 years. What purpose would that serve now?" "Maybe none," he admitted. "Maybe it's selfish of me, but I need you to know the truth." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Very well." Luke removed his hat, running a hand through his silver hair in a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "I did go to California, like I said. Worked the gold fields for a year and made some money, not a fortune, but enough to expand the ranch like I planned." "Then why didn't you return?" "I was on my way back when I got word that my father was sick. Not here, but in St. Louis, where he'd gone for treatment. I went there instead." Olivia frowned. "I never heard that your father was ill. Few people did. He was a proud man and didn't want charity or pity." Luke's eyes darkened with the memory. "It was consumption. By the time I reached him, he was failing fast. His last wish was for me to take my mother back to her family in Boston after he passed." "Boston?" This was news to Olivia. "I thought your mother was from Kentucky." "Her first husband was. After he died, she moved back to Boston, where she met my father. He convinced her to come west with him." Luke's mouth twisted in a wry smile. She never really took to frontier life, though she made the best of it for his sake. Olivia tried to reconcile this new information with what she'd always believed. "So you took her to Boston?" "Yes. I promised my father I'd see her settled there. I thought it would be a matter of months." Luke shook his head. "But she fell ill on the journey, pneumonia. By the time she recovered, winter had set in, making travel difficult. Then her brother died, leaving her his shipping business." "Your mother ran a shipping business?" Olivia couldn't hide her skepticism. "No, I did," Luke admitted. "She inherited it but had no interest in managing it. I intended to sell it and return west, but—" He hesitated. "There were complications. Legal matters. By the time everything was sorted, almost 2 years had passed." Your letters stopped long before that, Olivia pointed out, a hint of the old hurt creeping into her voice. Luke looked away, shame evident in his posture. I wrote regularly at first. When I didn't hear back, I assumed you'd grown tired of waiting. I never received any letters after the first year. His head snapped up. None. I sent at least a dozen. Olivia stared at him, confusion replacing certainty. The last letter I got was from Sacramento, saying you'd found some success in the gold fields and would be heading home soon. And you never wrote to tell me you hadn't heard anything more. I did, she insisted. Several times. When there was no response, she trailed off, the implications settling over them both. Someone intercepted our letters, Luke said slowly. But who would do that? Olivia's mind raced through possibilities. My father never approved of you. He thought you were too reckless, too fixated on grand plans rather than steady work. Would he have gone that far? I don't know, she admitted. He died before I married Thomas. I never had the chance to ask him. They resumed walking, both lost in thought. Even if that's true, Olivia finally said, why didn't you come back to see for yourself? If you really cared, I did come back, Luke interrupted. In the winter of '56, I arrived to find you married to Thomas Jenkins with a baby on the way. Olivia stopped short. You came back and said nothing. What was there to say? You'd made a new life. His voice held no accusation, only a deep sadness. I saw you in church that Sunday, sitting beside him, clearly expecting a child. You looked content. I was 19 weeks along with Martha, Olivia said softly. If you had come just 1 year earlier. I know. Luke's shoulders sagged. I told myself you were better off. Thomas was established, respected. He could give you stability I couldn't promise. So you left again. I went back to Boston, threw myself into the shipping business, eventually built it into something substantial. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Achieved the success I'd dreamed of, but without the person I wanted to share it with. Olivia absorbed this information, rearranging 3 decades of assumptions. Did you ever marry? Once. Elizabeth was a widow with a shipping business that complemented mine. It was more partnership than romance. His expression softened slightly. She was a good woman. We had 15 decent years before her heart gave out. Children, a son, William. He runs the business now. They had reached a bend in the creek where the water pooled deeply before continuing its journey. In their youth, they had often swum here on hot summer days. And then, Olivia prompted. And then Daniel wrote that he was ailing, asked me to consider coming home to take over the ranch when he was gone. Luke gestured vaguely eastward. I'd been considering retirement anyway. William has his own ideas for the business, and Boston never really felt like home. So here you are, here I am. He studied her face. Were you happy, Liv, with Thomas? The directness of the question startled her, but she answered honestly. Yes, not in the way I'd once imagined with you, but yes. Thomas was a good man, a good father. We built a life together that had meaning. Luke nodded, seeming genuinely relieved. I'm glad. I've carried enough guilt without adding to it. And what now? Olivia asked. Why tell me all this after so long? Because we live in the same small town, and I couldn't bear for us to spend the rest of our days avoiding each other or exchanging meaningless pleasantries. His gaze held hers steadily. I've missed your friendship, Liv. If nothing else, I'd like to find a way back to that. Friendship. Such a simple word for the complex tangle of emotions between them. Olivia wasn't sure it was possible, but found herself nodding anyway. Perhaps, in time. It was more than he'd hoped for, judging by the relief that crossed his face. That's all I ask. They walked back toward town in a silence less strained than before, parting ways at the church with a formal goodbye that belied the intensity of their conversation. That night, Olivia lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. her mind replaying Luke's revelations. If what he said was true, and she believed it was, then their separation had been built on misunderstandings and interference, not abandonment as she'd always believed. The thought was both comforting and devastating. What might their lives have been if fate had taken a different turn? Over the next few weeks, Whispering Creek buzzed with speculation as Luke Ingram settled back into community life. He hired workers to repair the neglected ranch buildings, purchased new cattle stock, and made appearances at town functions with a quiet dignity that impressed even his critics. Olivia saw him occasionally at church, at town meetings, once at the schoolhouse where she still taught 3 days a week despite her age. Their interactions were cordial but brief, mindful of the watchful eyes around them. It was Rebecca who unwittingly brought them together again. While shopping in town one afternoon, her horse pulled free of its hitching post and bolted. Luke, leaving the blacksmith shop, saw the animal charging down the street and managed to catch the reins, calming the frightened beast before it could cause harm. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram," Rebecca said, her face flushed with embarrassment as she reclaimed her horse. "I don't know what spooked him." "Probably the Miller boy's dog," Luke replied kindly. "That animal has been terrorizing horses all week." When Olivia heard about the incident that evening, she felt compelled to express her gratitude personally. The next day, she rode out to the Ingram ranch, a basket of fresh bread and preserves as a pretext for her visit. A ranch hand directed her to the corral, where Luke was working with a young colt. He didn't notice her approach, focused as he was on the nervous animal. Olivia watched silently, admiring the patience and gentle authority he displayed, qualities she remembered from their youth, but now tempered by wisdom. When he finally saw her, surprise and pleasure crossed his face. "Liv, this is unexpected." "I brought these to thank you for helping Rebecca yesterday," she said, offering the basket. "No thanks necessary, but I won't turn down your blackberry preserves." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something closer to the young man she'd known. "Would you like to come inside? I can offer coffee at least." The ranch house was much as she remembered it, though showing signs of recent repairs. Luke apologized for the sparse furnishings. "I haven't had time to make it proper. Been focusing on the outbuildings and stock first." "It's fine," Olivia assured him, accepting a cup of surprisingly good coffee. A house becomes a home gradually. They sat at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun slanting through windows that needed washing. For a moment, the years seemed to fall away and they were just Luke and Liv again, sharing coffee and conversation. "How are your children?" he asked. "Rebecca seems a capable young woman." "She is. Too smart for her own good sometimes, like her father." Olivia smiled fondly. "Martha is happily married with 2 children now. And Thomas Jr., we call him TJ, runs the mercantile his father built. You must be proud." "I am." She hesitated, then added, "And your son, William, was it?" Luke's expression brightened. "A born businessman, smarter than I ever was." "He married the daughter of a competing shipping line, a strategic alliance, he called it. They have twin girls who have him wrapped around their little fingers." "Grandchildren have a way of doing that," Olivia agreed, warming to the common ground of family pride. They talked easily for an hour, catching up on the decades of their separate lives. As Olivia prepared to leave, Luke walked her to her horse. "Thank you for coming, Liv. It meant a lot. The bread and preserves were the least I could do." "Not for those." His voice softened. "For taking the time to talk, for giving me a chance to explain after all these years." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "Are you all right, Luke?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Just getting old, I suppose, makes a man reflective." But there was something more. She sensed a weariness beyond his years, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of pain concealed. "If there's anything you need," she offered, "anything at all, I know where to find you." He helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist despite whatever ailment he was hiding. As she rode away, Olivia glanced back to see him still standing where she'd left him, watching her departure with an expression that stirred emotions she'd thought long buried. The summer progressed, bringing with it the usual rhythms of ranch life and small-town existence. Olivia found herself looking for Luke whenever she went to town, and their brief encounters became more frequent. Sometimes they would chat for a few minutes on the street corner or exchange observations at community gatherings. Slowly, cautiously, they rebuilt a friendship that acknowledged their past without being consumed by it. They were different people now, shaped by separate lives, tempered by individual joys and sorrows. Yet in each other's company, they found a comfort and understanding that had been absent in the intervening years. It was Rebecca who finally confronted her mother one evening as they sat on the porch, shelling peas for the next day's dinner. "You care for him, don't you?" she asked bluntly. "Mr. Ingram." Olivia's hand stilled. "He's an old friend, Mama." Rebecca gave her a look that said she wasn't fooled. "I've seen how you look when someone mentions his name, how you check to see if he's at church each Sunday." "That's ridiculous," Olivia protested, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. "Is it?" Rebecca set aside her bowl of peas. "Mrs. Patterson told me the whole story, how you were sweethearts before he went away, how heartbroken you were." "Mrs. Patterson should mind her own business," Olivia muttered, but without real heat. "Is that why you married Papa? Because Mr. Ingram left?" The question was asked without accusation, but it pierced Olivia nonetheless. "I married your father because he was a good, honorable man who loved me," she said firmly. "And I grew to love him deeply. Never doubt that." "I don't," Rebecca assured her. "But Papa's been gone 6 years, Mama. And you're still young enough to have some happiness." Olivia laughed despite herself. "I'm 48, Rebecca, hardly a young bride. You know what I mean." Her daughter reached over to take her hand. "I see how your face lights up after you've seen him. You deserve that light, Mama." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes. "It's not that simple." "Why not? You're both free. You clearly still care for each other." "We've lived entire lives apart," Olivia explained. "Built separate families, separate worlds. You can't just erase those years." "No," Rebecca agreed. "But you can build something new from where you are now." The wisdom in her youngest child's words stayed with Olivia long after they'd finished their task and gone inside. Could there be a second chance for her and Luke? Or were they simply ghosts from each other's pasts, temporarily resurrected by proximity and nostalgia? The following week brought a surprise visitor to the Jenkins home. Olivia was tending her garden when a buggy pulled up, carrying a distinguished-looking man in his early 30s. He approached with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making an impression. "Mrs. Jenkins," he inquired politely. "I'm William Ingram, Luke's son." Olivia straightened, wiping soil from her hands. "Mr. Ingram, this is unexpected. I apologize for arriving unannounced." His smile was charming but contained none of Luke's warmth. "I'm in town on business and hope to speak with you." She invited him inside, curious about this son Luke had mentioned with such pride. William accepted tea but declined food, getting straight to the point of his visit. "I'm concerned about my father," he said without preamble. "He's not well, though he refuses to admit it." Alarm flickered through Olivia. "Not well? In what way?" William's expression was grave. "His heart. The doctors in Boston warned him against returning to ranch work, but he insisted. Said he had unfinished business here." He studied her face. "I believe you're part of that business, Mrs. Jenkins." Olivia set down her teacup carefully. Your father and I were friends many years ago. We've recently renewed that acquaintance. With all due respect, Mrs. Jenkins, I believe it's more than that. William leaned forward. My father has spoken of you throughout my life. Even during his marriage to my mother, your name would occasionally slip from his lips, always with a certain reverence. She didn't know how to respond to this revelation. I'm not here to interfere, William continued, but I need to understand his intentions. The ranch is in poor condition. The work required to restore it would tax a man half his age in perfect health. What are you asking of me, Mr. Ingram? I want to know if you're the reason he's pushing himself so hard. William's gaze was direct, assessing. Is he trying to rebuild the ranch to impress you, to prove something? The suggestion took Olivia aback. If he is, it's not at my request or encouragement. I've been concerned about how much he's taking on, but he assures me he's fine. He's not fine, William said flatly. He had a minor heart attack 6 months ago in Boston. The doctor told him to retire completely, take things easy. Instead, he's working from dawn till dusk trying to resurrect a failing ranch. Olivia paled. I had no idea. No, you wouldn't. He's too proud to admit weakness. William's tone softened slightly. Mrs. Jenkins, I don't mean to upset you. I care about my father's well-being. If he's determined to stay here, I need allies in keeping him from working himself into an early grave. Of course, Olivia agreed immediately. I'll do whatever I can. Thank you. William rose to leave. There's something else you should know. I've offered to buy the ranch from him, give him a fair price so he can live comfortably without the physical strain. He refused. He loves this land, Olivia said. It's his heritage. Perhaps. William's expression was skeptical. Or perhaps he has other reasons for staying. His eyes met hers meaningfully. Good day, Mrs. Jenkins. After William left, Olivia sat motionless at her kitchen table, processing everything she'd learned. Luke was ill, possibly seriously so, and had concealed it from her. Was he really working so hard to impress her? The thought was both touching and terrifying. The next morning, she rode out to the Ingram ranch with a determination born of fear. She found Luke mending a fence line, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the relatively mild temperature. You should have told me, she said without greeting, dismounting from her horse. Luke straightened slowly, wincing slightly as he did so. William came to see you. Yes. She approached him, noting the pallor beneath his tan, the slight tremor in his hands. Why didn't you tell me about your heart? It's nothing, he dismissed. A minor episode, that's all. Don't lie to me, Luke Ingram. Her voice cracked with emotion. Not after everything. He sighed, leaning against the fence post. What did William tell you? That you had a heart attack? That your doctors advised against ranch work, that you're pushing yourself too hard. She moved closer, close enough to see the fatigue in his eyes. Is it true? Some of it, he admitted reluctantly. The doctors did warn me to take it easy, but I'm fine, Liv, really. You're not fine. Look at you, you can barely stand. I'm just tired, been working since sunrise. Which is exactly what you shouldn't be doing. Frustration and fear made her voice sharper than intended. Why, Luke? Why risk your health this way? He met her gaze directly. You know why. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Olivia shook her head, tears threatening. Not like this. Not if it means watching you work yourself to death. I need to get the ranch back on its feet, he insisted. Make it something to be proud of again. And then what? What's the point if you're not around to enjoy it? She took his rough hand in hers. Please, Luke, there are other ways. Hire more help, take your time, or consider William's offer. Luke's expression hardened. I'm not selling the ranch. Then at least be sensible about how you manage it. Her fingers tightened around his. For my sake, if not your own, something in her words reached him. His resistance softened and he nodded slowly. "All right, for your sake." The concession was small but significant. Over the next few weeks, Olivia made it her business to check on Luke regularly, sometimes bringing meals, other times simply stopping by to ensure he wasn't overexerting himself. She helped him hire additional hands and insisted he delegate the more strenuous tasks. Gradually, their relationship deepened beyond friendship. They began taking regular evening walks, sharing meals, attending church functions together. The town noticed. Of course, tongues wagged about the rekindled romance between the widow and the returned rancher, but neither Luke nor Olivia paid much attention to the gossip. By autumn, they had fallen into a comfortable routine that acknowledged their feelings without putting a name to them. They were too old, they told themselves, for courtship in the traditional sense. Yet there was undeniably something growing between them, a second chance neither had expected. On a crisp October evening, they sat on Luke's porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. A comfortable silence had settled between them, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle or call of a night bird. "I've been thinking," Luke said finally, his voice thoughtful, "about all the years we spent apart." Olivia glanced at him, noting the pensive set of his mouth. "What about them? We grew old apart in silence," he said slowly, "each building lives separated by misunderstanding and circumstance. All those years wasted." "Not wasted," she corrected gently. "Different than we planned, but not without value. You built a business, raised a son, I had my family, my school. But we could have had those things together." Regret shadowed his features. "If I'd come back sooner. If I'd tried harder to find you. We can't change the past, Luke." "No." He turned to face her, taking her hand in his. His palm was calloused but warm against her skin. "But we can change what happens next." Olivia's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "I mean this." Luke slid from his chair to one knee before her, wincing slightly at the movement but determined nonetheless. "Olivia Jenkins, we've lost too many years already. I don't want to lose any more." "Luke," she began, but he gently pressed a finger to her lips. "Let me finish, please." When she nodded, he continued. "I loved you when we were young and foolish, and I love you now that we're old and hopefully a bit wiser. I came back to Whispering Creek for the ranch, yes, but also for you, for the chance that you might still have a place in your heart for me." Tears blurred Olivia's vision as he pressed her hand to his chest, where she could feel the steady but slightly irregular beat of his heart. "We'll grow old together now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you'll have me." For a moment, Olivia couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Memories cascaded through her mind, the young lovers they had been, the separate paths they had walked, the mature souls they had become. Different, yes, but in many ways the same in all that mattered. "Yes," she finally whispered, her free hand reaching to cup his weathered cheek. "Yes, Luke. I'll have you." His smile was radiant as he rose and pulled her to her feet, into an embrace that felt like coming home after a very long journey. When their lips met, it was both familiar and new, a kiss that acknowledged their shared past while promising a future neither had dared hope for. The news of their engagement spread through Whispering Creek like wildfire. Most received it with joy and congratulations, though a few raised eyebrows at the propriety of a widow remarrying. Olivia's children had mixed reactions. Martha was cautiously supportive, TJ reserved judgment, and Rebecca was unabashedly delighted. "I told you so," she said smugly when Olivia shared the news. William Ingram returned to Whispering Creek upon receiving his father's letter. His initial meeting with Olivia was formal but not unfriendly. "You make him happy," he acknowledged over dinner at the ranch house. "I haven't seen him this animated in years." "He makes me happy too," Olivia replied simply. William studied her with shrewd eyes so like his father's. "And the ranch, what are your plans for it?" "That's Luke's decision," she said, "though I've made it clear his health must come first. And if the doctor advises him to sell, to move somewhere less demanding," Olivia met his gaze steadily, "then I'll support whatever choice he makes. My commitment is to him, Mr. Ingram, not to this land." Her answer seemed to satisfy him. When William left for Boston the following day, his farewell to Olivia was warmer, his handshake firmer. "Take care of him," he said. "He's stubborn as they come, but he listens to you." "I will," she promised. They planned a December wedding, small and dignified, befitting their age and circumstances. As the date approached, Luke's health improved with proper rest and care. The color returned to his face, and though he still tired more easily than he liked to admit, his strength was steadily returning. The night before their wedding, a heavy snow blanketed Whispering Creek, transforming the landscape into a glistening white expanse. Olivia stood at her bedroom window, watching the moonlight play across the pristine surface, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Rebecca knocked softly before entering, carrying a steaming cup of tea. "Nervous?" she asked, offering the drink. "A little," Olivia admitted. "It seems strange to be a bride again at my age. I think it's wonderful." Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed. "Second chances are rare, Mama. You deserve this one." Olivia smiled at her youngest daughter, heart full. "Thank you, dear, for understanding, for encouraging me. I just want you to be happy." Rebecca hesitated, then added, "Papa would want that too, you know. He wouldn't have wanted you to be alone." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes. "I know." The ceremony took place in the small church where they had both worshipped throughout their lives. Reverend Walsh, himself getting on in years, performed the service with evident pleasure. The church was decorated simply with evergreen boughs and red berries, the air fragrant with pine and beeswax candles. Olivia wore a gown of deep blue silk, not white, which would have been inappropriate for a widow, but a color that brought out the silver in her hair and the remaining flecks of gold in her eyes. Luke waited for her at the altar in a new black suit, his face solemn until he saw her walking toward him. Then his expression transformed into one of such joy and wonder that several guests were seen dabbing at their eyes. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Walsh began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found their way back to each other through God's infinite wisdom and grace. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with the depth of feeling that comes from lives fully lived, from understanding the true value of the promises being made." When Luke slipped the simple gold band onto Olivia's finger, his hands were steady and sure. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his voice strong and clear, "for all the days we have remaining." The celebration afterward was held at the schoolhouse, transformed for the occasion with garlands and lanterns. The entire town seemed to attend, bringing dishes and gifts and well wishes. Even Mrs. Patterson, the town gossip, was heard to remark that it was the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. As evening fell, Luke led Olivia onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. They moved slowly, mindful of his health but determined to honor the tradition. "Happy," he murmured, his arm secure around her waist. "More than I thought possible," she answered truthfully. "And you?" "I've waited half a lifetime for this day." His eyes held hers, full of promise. Every moment was worth it. Later, as they prepared to leave for the ranch that would now be their shared home, Rebecca approached with a small package. "A wedding gift," she explained, pressing it into Olivia's hands. "Open it when you're alone together." Curious, Olivia waited until they were settled in the ranch house, the fire crackling warmly in the hearth, before unwrapping the gift. Inside was a beautifully bound journal, its leather cover tooled with intertwining vines and flowers. "What a thoughtful present," Luke remarked, examining it over her shoulder. Olivia opened the cover to find Rebecca's handwriting on the first page. "For the story you're beginning now. May each page be filled with joy, and may you grow old together in love rather than apart in silence." Rebecca beneath her signature was a quote from Ecclesiastes. "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she showed the inscription to Luke. She always was the poetic one. "Wise beyond her years," Luke agreed, his arm encircling her shoulders. "And right about this, we have a new story to write, you and I." "Yes," Olivia said, leaning into his embrace, "and I intend for it to be a happy one." In the years that followed, Luke and Olivia built a life together that honored both their shared past and their separate journeys. The ranch prospered under Luke's experienced guidance and Olivia's practical management. They hired a capable foreman who handled the physical labor, allowing Luke to focus on the business aspects without overtaxing his heart. William visited regularly, gradually warming to his new stepmother and the life his father had chosen. Olivia's children and grandchildren became frequent visitors to the ranch, filling the once quiet house with laughter and energy that both Luke and Olivia treasured. They traveled occasionally to Boston to see William and his family, to San Francisco, where TJ expanded the mercantile business, to Denver, where Martha's husband had banking interests. But they always returned to Whispering Creek, to the land and community that had shaped them. On clear evenings, they would sit on their porch watching the sunset, sometimes in companionable silence, other times sharing memories or plans for the future. They filled Rebecca's journal with accounts of their days together, the simple joys, the occasional challenges, the deep contentment of lives finally intertwined. 3 years after their wedding, on a warm spring morning, Luke took Olivia's hand as they stood surveying the ranch from the hill behind the house. The land spread before them, green and thriving, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "Look at what we've built," he said with quiet pride. Olivia squeezed his hand, knowing he meant not just the ranch but the life they'd created together. "It's beautiful. Worth waiting for," Luke added, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Though I wish we hadn't had to wait quite so long." "Everything in its time," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "We're together now, that's what matters." He turned to face her, his green eyes still capable of making her heart beat faster after all these years. "I love you, Liv, more each day. And I love you." She reached up to touch his face, now as familiar to her as her own. "Always have, always will." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Olivia reflected on the strange, winding path that had led them here, the young lovers they had been, the separate lives they had lived, the mature love they had found in their second chance. They had indeed grown old apart in silence. But now, by grace and fortune and perhaps a touch of destiny, they would grow old together in a harmony sweeter for having been so long delayed. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.